Good morning. My name is Maricel Dicion, and I am the VP of Strategy at Women of Influence Plus. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I would like to send a special thank you to TENA for partnering with us on this event and sparking open, inclusive conversations about health, visibility, and aging. Their commitment helps ensure that women are fully seen at every stage of life. Now, before I introduce our guest expert, I'd just like to quickly frame up today's conversation. Throughout our careers, women experience a continuum of physical transitions: menstruation, fertility treatments, pregnancy, mat leave, motherhood, perimenopause, and menopause. Now, each of these stages affects our energy, focus, and health, and how someone shows up at work. Historically, workplaces have treated these experiences as private matters, something to manage quietly, instead of recognizing how they influence, and as a matter of fact, that they actually influence leadership, team dynamics, and business outcomes. Today's conversation aims to reframe these experiences as realities of leadership that organizations should understand and support. Joining me today is Jen Murtagh, co-founder of Maturn. Jen is an award-winning leader and gender equity advocate who has spent more than 2 decades helping organizations support women through these critical transitions. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning. Makes me sound old. I'm a proud Gen Xer, okay? I'm still gonna go there.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much for advancing this conversation. It is much needed.
Absolutely. Now, one last piece of housekeeping before we jump into the first question. To our valued audience members, please do share your questions and your comments in the comments section. My colleague Lou will be monitoring, and we will try our very best to get to some of your questions through this discussion. Now, Jen, to kick things off, why is it important to bring women's health into a leadership conversation? And why now in particular?
Yeah, it's a great question. We know that women make up nearly half the workforce, yet most workplace systems were never really designed with women in mind or women's health in mind. And so across those sort of 4 critical stages, fertility, maternity leave, motherhood, and perimenopause and menopause, women are really disproportionately impacted by these life stages. And they're experiencing unique physical, emotional, professional challenges that really do go unsupported. And those costs are real. We know the cost of the motherhood penalty, which actually accounts for a 37% reduction in women's lifetime earnings. Millions of women consider stepping back or leaving work due to some of these unmanaged symptoms and the lack of support. And so I kind of think we're at a tipping point. We've got some demographic shifts, talent shortages, and sort of this, kind of growing openness around mental and reproductive health. And I think that is pushing organizations to evolve and expand their support. And so we believe at Maturn that bringing women's health into leadership conversations, it's not like a wellness issue. It's really a business equity, and it's a cultural imperative.
Mm-hmm. During our, prep conversations for this event, Jen, we stated, you framed it beautifully. You said, it's not just the right thing to do. It's very much so the smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to, a question that comes from our friends at TENA. Workplaces have long treated women's health as private, as I mentioned before, than organizational. Now, for example, you shared a great stat that connects the motherhood penalty to a reduction in salary or earning potential. 1 in 3 women will experience bladder leaks in their lifetime, and that's rarely discussed. Now, our friends at TENA are passionate about opening these kinds of conversations. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to know what happens to women's careers and leadership opportunities when we don't talk about these realities openly.
Yeah, I think for too long, workplaces have treated women's health issues as private, something that they need to manage quietly on their own time, which is sort of ironic given what an impact, it and how it intersects with our work. We can't compartmentalize this. And that sort of silence, it does fuel stigma. Women don't really sometimes feel safe to ask for support. They often push through, often at their own expense to their careers. They burn out, they leave. And so, the data is becoming clearer and clearer. 1 in 3 women consider leaving their jobs due to lack of menopause support. And we see similar patterns in fertility and maternity transitions. And so ignoring women's health, doesn't just hurt women, it does hurt culture, organization, the future of leadership. And it impacts that shrinking leadership pipeline, especially mid-career, when women, might be expanding their capacity, but they're actually stepping out.
Jen, can we talk about the transitions, the physical transitions that women navigate through their entire lifetimes? So menstruation, fertility, maternity leave, peri, and menopause. They remain the most invisible in workplace structures today. Of these, what do you think remains the most invisible but has the most impact?
Oh gosh, I want to say it all. It all has an impact, Fertility, if you are going through a fertility journey, that can be emotionally and physically taxing, especially for women that are navigating treatments, the stress of that. Often the recurrent pregnancy loss that is often coupled with that, and having to show up and put on a brave face at work. This is really rarely considered in workplace flexibility policy. So I saw Samreen put in the chat, tangible actions, like, does your organization have like a pregnancy loss bereavement policy? That is like one thing that you could offer in that perspective. Even maternity leave, though it's more visible, it often lacks systems to reintegrate women successfully back into that leadership track. So a lot of companies continue to invest in women when they're on leave, if they want to be invested in. And I've got lots of ideas on that. And then I think perimenopause and menopause is sort of the least recognized stage. However, I do think this generation of women are really bringing this into the forefront. If you are a woman in an organization that has influence and power, you should be talking about this, because it affects a huge percentage of the population and for a long period of time. Like perimenopause can last up to 10 years. It can start anytime sort of mid-30s onwards, with the median age for menopause being about 51 in Canada. And so that is impacting a significant part of your workforce, especially those tenured leaders that have a lot of historical knowledge, experience. You want them there. And so finding ways to support them is going to be imperative to keep them.
Jen, in your experience, what shifts when organizations decide to recognize and support these realities instead of sidelining them?
Yeah, well, I'd love to see in the chat as well, like what people think shifts when organizations decide to recognize, like, as a woman in a workplace, if you feel like you're being seen and valued, like, what does that do for you? I'd love to see some thoughts in the chat. And as those are coming through, I believe when I feel seen and valued and supported, that increases my loyalty, my retention, probably my engagement. That's going to improve my performance. It also, I think when that psychological safety grows, it creates more inclusive cultures for everyone. And companies can really build more loyalty as progressive employers who kind of really want to attract that top talent. And so, it's been largely ignored, these sort of like 4 key life stages, which is why Maturn's, offering programs in this area, people training, and also advocacy and research that we're sharing with organizations across North America.
Jen, I want to take a question from one of our audience members here. This is from Apala. I do hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and I apologize if I'm not. How do physical changes, for example, pregnancy, aging, menopause, impact your self-image or confidence at work?
Great question. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people, regardless of what you've experienced in life, I know for me, and I can speak from my own personal experience, I was a very driven, young, ambitious woman, director of marketing at the time when I got pregnant with my daughter. And I remember returning back to work like a shell of who I was when I left. And that was a driving force for co-creating Maturn. My confidence was completely diminished. They had put somebody in my place that was, probably had more experience, was a man, was really well liked. I came back, holy crow, my inner critic was so loud. I'd forgotten who I was, that really strong leader that could walk in there and command a boardroom or share their ideas. Like, I had no access to her anymore. And so I think that when you lose access to sort of that part of yourself, which you inevitably do on maternity leave, your confidence can be depleted, especially if so much of your value and your worth was intrinsically tied to your career. And so that's why we have a maternity leave program that really supports women, not just on the transition to leave, but throughout their entire leave and in that really important return to work. And so I do believe that women do need more support through that transition, because it's a pivotal life change. It's an identity changing moment. And we all deserve more intentional and meaningful support.
Thank you for sharing that, Jen. I think that that will resonate. It certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure it'll resonate with a lot of our audience members. And just building on that, I would like to talk about your work at Maturn. Now, can you share some examples where building systems of support changed outcomes for a woman and the company in a positive direction?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've supported thousands of women through our programs at Maturn. And we've seen firsthand how systems of support really change outcomes, both for the organizations and for the women. And so women are returning to work with sort of greater confidence, greater clarity. You know, we had recently a mom said, you know, she applied for a promotion within the first 3 months back because she was so anchored into her own value when she returned. She said, I never would have done that without this program. And she applied for the promotion and she got it. And so a lot of women through our maternity leave program really feel like they don't need to keep reproving themselves when they come back to work. They're putting up their hands, they're continuing to advance their career in a way that makes sense for them, that feels in alignment for them. At the same time, organizations are embedding our people leaders training. So it shouldn't all be up to women. So that's why we invest in upskilling and reskilling people leaders so that they can better understand how to support women through these key life stages. Because we hear this often, right? People don't necessarily leave organizations, they leave managers. And if you have not a great manager who you need support from and they're not providing it, you're probably likely to leave. So it's really important to, you know, train people leaders as well to understand where their maternal bias is showing up, to understand more about perimenopause and menopause and the up to 80 different symptoms that can be showing up. It's not just all about like hot flashes, right? There's huge cognitive changes and lots that can be going on here. So, you know, the result has really been lower turnover, stronger engagement, and really more, you know, more diverse leadership pipelines. And so we're focused on like, how do we help women grow and stay and lead, because we need these voices at our tables.
So what I heard from that is that it's the smart thing, because now you have a stronger pipeline, you have a more engaged workforce, a healthier culture, but it's also the right thing, because women who are navigating these massive changes, you mentioned it's not just a physical change, it's absolutely an identity shift as you move through these different life stages. You know, when you feel seen, when you feel psychologically and emotionally safe, of course, you're performing better. Of course, you contribute differently or probably at a higher level. Would you be comfortable speaking to what a manager who understands how to navigate these things, how do they show up? What does that support actually look like in the workplace?
Yeah, I think the very first thing is they're more empathetic. They have more empathy, even if they don't have the lived experience. They may not. And I'm sure even if it's, you know, a male who's a parent, he's still not going to have the lived experience that maybe his, you know, partner might have. So they show up with more empathy. I think they show up with more curiosity. They don't make assumptions, which is what we see time and time again. And this is why women choose not to disclose, oh, I'm on a fertility journey. Oh, I'm looking at starting a family. Oh, I'm in perimenopause and menopause, because there's research to show they're penalized when they do that. And so I think when managers don't make assumptions and they're curious and they ask, they're more well-informed as well. And I think that approaching it from that lens is really the best way to do it. On top of that, you know, we provide tools, strategy, languaging, like things you should be doing, things you shouldn't be doing, just based on, you know, we ran a report last year where we had over 1,000 women who took maternity leave in Canada in the last 7 years. And they told us what would have helped me more was, and then we collated that into a national report and we sent it to hundreds of organizations across Canada to try and provide recommendations on what they can be doing better. And the same for perimenopause and menopause. There's lots of different things people leaders can be doing, but it takes a person to say, I'm interested, I want to do better, know better, do better. We need more of that at the table.
Absolutely. Jen, can we shift slightly over to the individual perspective? Now, on an individual level, what does being supported through these stages mean for a woman's confidence, their authority, and their leadership? I know we spoke about this through your answers and for the other questions, but can we really dive into this?
Yeah.
How does this actually change the trajectory of a woman's career?
Well, I mean, you think about when women are well, or at least feel like they can manage through some of these really challenging stages of life, there's a huge ripple effect to that, not just in our workplaces, but in our families, in our communities. And so everyone benefits from women being well, because we touch so much, because we assume still so much of the mental load. And that's a whole other conversation. Everyone benefits from that. But women especially, they can gain confidence to lead without being fear of sort of being judged or being sidelined or being seen as less capable. I think when you're able to turn the volume down on that voice of the inner critic, women really can anchor more into their power and their worth. I think they also build authority to advocate for what they need and for what other women need within their organization, and to model that sort of inclusive behavior. I also think they experience more freedom to show up, sort of, we always say, bring your whole self to work, right? Okay, well, what does that really mean? And so they experience more freedom to actually show up fully without the constant double performance of hiding pain or fatigue or personal realities. I've heard so many conversations from very senior leaders, senior women in leadership roles saying, you know what, I'm the only woman on the executive table. And oh my gosh, I did this thing last week and I brought menopause to the table. And we started talking about it. And she was, and I was so worried about that. But the conversation actually turned out really well. And so I think that, women that are able to do that, because I see two types of women. One is, it was hard for me, so why should it be easier for you? And we hear about these kinds of women all the time, right? You should also suffer. I had to suffer. And then I don't want to be that woman. I want to be the woman to be it was hard for them. So how can we do to make it easier and more inclusive for those that come after us? It is our duty.
Thank you for that answer. It was both inspiring and very empowering. And I was jotting down something you were saying because it was so powerful. When women are well, there's a huge ripple effect in our workplaces, families, and communities. Everyone benefits when women are well. I love that. So Jen, let's turn back to workplaces. Now, for women who are in organizations that aren't there yet, how can they begin to advocate for themselves and their needs? And if we're also building on the second type that you mentioned, which is the woman who wants to make it easier for the leaders coming up behind her, how do you advocate for change in a place that hasn't necessarily been open to that or explored it yet?
Yeah, it's tough, especially if you're in a male-dominated environment when there maybe is not a ton of psychological safety. I know I've been inside of those before, and I know how challenging it can feel and vulnerable when you're the squeaky wheel. But I'm going to share a few kind of key things. So one is just starting with data. I love data, and there's lots of it. So sharing research on retention risks, the motherhood penalty, the business impact of not supporting women through these key life stages. There's real costs here. It costs 150 to 200% of a senior leader's salary to lose a woman in a senior leadership role. That's a huge cost when you think about the onboarding, the recruitment, and the development of someone new into that role. So data is great, bottom line sort of stuff. I think building allies is also important. So connecting with managers, peers, ERG groups who can amplify your voice and help champion change. I would say, frame it as leadership, not a personal request. So when you advocate for systemic support, you're creating a more equitable culture for everyone. Sometimes just taking more small, maybe practical steps. So proposing flexible work pilots, enhanced health benefits, or just some awareness as starting points. For Maturn, we come into a lot of organizations just to do like one workshop. And sometimes that then sparks a conversation that over the next year or two, things start to change more. So starting small. If your organization isn't sure where to begin, you can circulate programs like we offer at Maturn. Hey, have you heard about this? To either your learning and development, DEI, your total rewards team. And sometimes these conversations start with just like one person's courage to ask for something better. Often when I see, or when we meet with organizations that, we often meet with like a total rewards person, they're like, yeah, we're good. No, our women are so happy. It's like, well, could you include maybe 1 or 2 questions on your next employee engagement survey and just test that to see if they're good? Look at who's creating your benefits and policies. Do they have lived experience in this space? When were they last reviewed? I think it's okay to ask questions like that. Just to, and if you feel like you can, those are just a few small things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Jen. I wanted to ask also, you mentioned a report that you and the team at Maturn developed. Is that something that we could link in the comments after the event?
Yeah, absolutely. It's right on our website too, maturn.com. It was called, the report is called Expecting More, the Motherhood Penalty and its impact on Canadian women at work, and data points were over 1,000. You should have seen the stories, the comments, like it blew our minds what women have been navigating through still in 2024, 2025, when it comes to just even one aspect, maternity leave.
Wonderful. So we'll drop that link in the comment section so folks can access that. Now, for staying in organizations, what is the risk, or what is at risk rather, if they continue to treat these issues as private and not professional matters?
Yeah, I think you're going to just start hemorrhaging women from your organization. Like these old school systems, organizations that were built with men or by men, for men, with men in mind, like I really think they're going to phase out because people are demanding more. And this whole, I'm Generation X. I think about millennials under me, and then Gen Z, Gen A, Alpha Gen, like they're going to have no interest in working for organizations that don't address this. So you're going to lose top talent, often those in mid-career and senior leadership roles, when women should be stepping into their full potential. Organizations will also continue to get weakened leadership pipelines. Gender diversity stalls at the top, the cost of turnover climbs. I think there's also a brand and culture risk. Employees and consumers, we're paying a little bit more attention. And I think we expect organizations to prioritize some of these things in visible ways. And so, at Maturn, we're seeing that there are companies that are leaning in, and they're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do, but they also know it's going to positively impact their bottom line and help them attract the type of talent and keep the talent that they want.
Now let's talk about the upside. And you just mentioned that. Retention, talent pipelines, workplace culture. So can we dive in a bit deeper in terms of what you've seen with the organizations that you've worked with? When you intentionally support women across these transitions, how does that upside show up?
Yeah, we do a lot of impact reports, especially for organizations we work with, in terms of the qualitative and quantitative data that we see from women as they're exiting one of our programs or coming back to work. So we're seeing a lot more engagement improve, confidence improve, retention. Women are putting up their hands. A lot of our programs really focus on your own inner work. And so a lot of women are actually able really to dial that voice of the inner critic way down. And so they're stepping into positions of leadership. They're saying yes to things that they might have traditionally said no to. So we're seeing retention improve. Women are far more likely to stay and advance rather than step back. In fact, actually studies, I do have a research here that companies with robust maternity leave and menopause support see up to a 50% higher retention among mid-career women. And we've heard that anecdotally as well with the women in our programs. Obviously, we're talking about a lot about leadership pipeline strengthening, cultural shifts, I think the return on investment is really undeniable. McKinsey research shows that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams are 25% more likely to perform financially. And at Maturn, we're sort of seeing firsthand how investing in women's health and leadership isn't obviously just the right thing to do, but it is a strategic advantage. We have a lot of women coming to us saying, who are you working with? Because I want to go work for them. So, women are paying attention.
Absolutely. I mean, the through line here is what I love so much about our conversation is we do talk about why it's the right thing to do, but also why it's the smart thing to do for organizations. It has an impact on, it's the right thing to do for your workforce. It's a smart thing to do for your bottom line. Now, if we zoom out, what does it mean for society when women's full leadership potential is not constrained by silence around reproductive health? If women were fully supported, through these transitions in the workplace, what do you think our world would look like? How would it operate?
Well, I mean, I think we just take over the world. Like the bigger vision. I often think like, what if every woman woke up tomorrow morning feeling fully supported, no inner critic? Like, I think we would just, kind of just, we would feel that natural worth and value to just step into our full power, from just like a visionary perspective. So, and that's how I always am. I'm a bit of a visionary. I think, when we stay silent on this, we don't just hold women back, we continue to hold sort of that progress back. And I feel personally inclined to make a change on that. I often think, am I going to kind of sit around and wait for the world to evolve? Or am I going to be part of that evolutionary change by advancing this type of work, by using my voice? Because, I have kids and I want to see a different reality for them in the next sort of 10 to 50 years. I think the economy, we know this, the economy loses billions of dollars because women's talent isn't fully supported. And younger generations grow up seeing fewer role models who have been able to lead through these life stages. So when women's leadership is constrained, everyone loses. When we create workplaces where women can lead, grow, and stay, that gives the ability for everyone to rise, especially because women are so relational. We are amazing leaders. We have our intuition, our empathy, is really expanded, and we invest in people around us. So when we rise, we take people with us. At least that's what I would hope for. And I'm sure every woman joining this conversation is committed to that. And thanks, Megan, for dropping in some more data. She also loves data. And there's a really great article she put into the chat as well.
Wonderful. We are almost at time, but Jen, I'm going to sneak in one last question here. So for the women in our audience, what is a tangible step or, a recommendation that you would make in terms of here's what you can do today to better support yourself, to advocate for yourself, and for leaders who have joined us, who have the influence and power within their organizations to move this conversation forward in a meaningful way, what next step could they then take?
I mean, I would say bring it back to an ERG group. Say, hey, I participated in this, Women of Influence event. All these things came up for me. It started making me think, what are we doing here internally? So maybe just commit to one conversation to have, maybe with a senior leader, with an ERG group. You could circulate some of our work to your HR department and say, this is an organization in North America that is committed to this. And, we kind of see that we're one of the only ones out there, really these 4 key life stages. I think that those are 2 really easy things that you could do. And, on a more micro level, just maybe being a role model within your organization to surface some of these conversations, maybe even in your next one-on-one or your team meetings. Like, hey, I attended this, I just want to let you know I'm a safe space if you ever want to talk about any of these things that you might be going through. Sometimes saying that can go way more expanded than you even realize. And Maria says, stand in your worth. I completely agree.
Oh, I love that. That's a great comment to end the conversation with. Jen, we are at time. I knew that was going to go very quickly. Thank you to Sonia, who linked the reports that Jen mentioned earlier on in our chat. You can find that at maturn.com. And before we close, I'd just like to thank our partner, TENA. This series is made possible with their support, and through our partnership, we're committed to ensuring women are fully seen and supported at every life stage. Our next event will take place on November 17th. Please stay tuned for those details. Jen, thank you for carving time out of your morning. Jen is joining us from BC this morning. So thank you for taking the time. And we hope that everyone who joined found value in this discussion.
Thank you, Maricel. And thank you, Tana.